Since I can remember, my life in Brazil has always been a daily struggle. I was born and raised in a small town where dreams are big, but opportunities are small. Looking around, everything felt suffocating, and the stories of those who tried for something better and failed were frighteningly common. However, I had something many around me did not have: hope, an inner strength that made me believe that somewhere in the world, a new life awaited me. This hope was what kept me going, even when life seemed heavy. My childhood was marked by lack of money, support, someone to tell me that things could work out for me. My parents, honest and hardworking people, raised me to be like that too, but seeing my friends get lost in crime or settle for jobs that led nowhere, I began to question if that life was what God had really planned for me. I remember the nights I stayed awake, wondering what it would be like to cross a border and find a place where I could be more than someone who simply survives. The idea of the United States was a flame inside me, growing stronger over time. I had heard stories of those who went and returned, and others of those who never came back. It was dangerous, but it was all I had. Then I made the decision. I was going to try. Without knowing exactly what awaited me, without even knowing anyone there, I decided this would be my journey. I knew many would call it madness, others despair, but for me, it was my chance to find something greater, something that justified all the nights of questioning and silent prayers. With fear and courage sharing space in my chest, I prepared for the unknown, convinced that this journey would take me somewhere better. When I left home that early morning, the sky was heavy with dark clouds, as if bidding me farewell silently. In the pocket of my jeans, I carried only the essentials: a bit of money I had saved with hard work, a crumpled photo of my family, and a small Bible. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, not even my mother, who, if she knew what I was about to do, would try to stop me at any cost. It wasn't a joyful departure. It was an escape, almost a last resort. And even without knowing what tomorrow would be like, part of me believed this was my only chance at a dignified life. I traveled for days until I reached the starting point, a city on the border between Mexico and the United States, where people with the same hope and despair gathered, each with their own reason, their own story. In that place, no one asked about anyone's past. Everyone knew that carrying their own pain and dreams was enough. I knew the next step would be risky. I had heard stories of people who lost their lives trying, but what few talk about is that, for many of us, the life we left behind already felt like a slow death. So we accept the risks, and I accepted them too, without looking back. Amid the nervousness, the hours seemed eternal until I was finally called. It was my turn. A burly man with a stern expression and few words organized us into groups, each with a mission: to cross the border as discreetly as possible. That night, the silence was profound, interrupted only by the sound of our careful footsteps and the snapping of dry branches under our feet. The air was cold, but sweat was running down my face. The path was narrow, and the feeling of always being on the verge of being discovered was suffocating. I watched everything around me, the vast, dark desert, the shadows of mountains in the distance, and wondered how many before me had stepped here with the same fear and hope in their hearts. For a moment, I felt my breath failing. I was exhausted, and the fear mixed with an almost unbearable desire to give up, to return to a place where at least I knew the dangers. But with each step, I reminded myself why I was there. It was my faith that kept me firm. I felt I wasn't alone. Even in moments of despair and inner strength, something greater than myself propelled me. I clutched the Bible in my pocket as if holding it was enough to protect me from the worst. The night dragged on, and the distance to the border seemed infinite. The whole group was exhausted, many stopping every minute to catch their breath. Then something unexpected happened. One of the men beside me tripped and fell loudly. In the desert silence, the noise was like thunder. Everyone froze. I looked back and saw he was injured, but we would continue. There was no time to help anyone who fell because any second of delay was a risk. That made me realize how lonely this path was. It was every man for himself. When we finally reached the other side, the relief was mixed with the guilt of leaving companions behind. But it was done. I had made it. The ground I was standing on was American soil. The most dangerous part was behind me, but I knew my battle was far from over. From then on, a different struggle would begin, a fight to survive as an illegal immigrant in a country that wasn't mine. With little money and no support network, I would need to find something or someone to guide me. More than ever, I felt the need for a purpose, something to sustain me in this strange land. Then I remembered a promise I made before I left. If I manage to cross this border, I will find a way to be a better person, I murmured to myself. Maybe it was a promise to God, perhaps a way to comfort myself. I knew that here, in this new place, I needed more than just luck. I needed something greater, something that gave me a reason to continue. From there, I knew my life needed direction, and that's when I decided to seek out a church, something to connect me with my faith and remind me of Brazil. No matter how alone I felt, something told me this search would bring me the answers I had been looking for. After crossing the border, I began to understand that the danger and tension of the journey had only been the beginning. I was in a strange country where I barely understood the language and knew that at any moment I could be caught, deported, or simply ignored. Every corner, every unfamiliar face reminded me that I was a foreigner, someone without rights and with few friends. On the first day, I found a place to sleep, an improvised shelter for illegal immigrants like me. I slept with my head resting on my backpack, trying to ignore the noise around me, but I couldn't. The reality around me was raw, and the feeling of loneliness and insecurity had never felt so overwhelming. I woke up the next morning with the sun streaming through a crack in the window. I got up feeling the weight of the previous night, but also the need to go out and find something to support myself. I knew I was practically invisible to the American government, but I needed to make this new life worth it. I had to start somehow. I looked for jobs in low-wage work cleaning, loading boxes, anything that would give me enough money to survive. The first days felt like living adrift. It was like being caught in a wave, being taken from side to side without control. I worked exhausting hours, but the money barely covered food and rent for a dirty little room I shared with other immigrants. Those nights, before sleeping, I would take the small Bible out of my pocket and remember the promise I made crossing the border, to find a way to be a better person, to find a purpose greater than just surviving. I felt I needed something to keep me steady, something to remind me of who I was, where I came from, and that I wasn't alone. One afternoon, after an especially difficult shift, I heard about a small evangelical church in the neighborhood. It seemed like a modest church with few members, but I was told that they helped immigrants and didn't ask questions about their status. I decided to go, more out of curiosity and the need to feel a little peace. When I arrived, I was greeted by a small group of people from different backgrounds. They were all, in some way, like me looking for a safe harbor in the storm of uncertainties. The first time I entered the church hall, I felt something special. It wasn't grand, without cathedrals or elaborate decorations. Just a simple space, plastic chairs, a few Bibles on shelves, and a small altar. But to me, that place was everything I needed at that moment. There, I could breathe easily and feel that I didn't have to pretend to be something I wasn't. The pastor, a woman with a firm voice and a welcoming gaze, welcomed me. She only asked my name and said that if I needed support, I could find it there. Those words touched me more than anything else I had heard since I arrived. It was as if, for the first time, someone recognized my humanity amid so much uncertainty. I started attending church every Sunday. As time passed, I became more involved in activities. I attended meetings and support groups the church offered, where I could share a little of my story and listen to others' stories. There, no one cared about my past or my legal status. We were all there, in a way, seeking redemption, a better life. With each sermon I listened to, I felt something inside me change. The message of faith and hope, of new beginnings and forgiveness, helped me deal with the pain of being so far from home. I felt that my faith, once just a spark, was growing, illuminating the dark corners of my soul. That church became my refuge, and gradually, I began to understand that perhaps my journey, there wasn't just an escape from Brazil, but a spiritual quest, something I needed to find to feel complete. I still had my fears and uncertainties, but for the first time since crossing the border, I felt I wasn't alone. The pastor offered me a simple job at the church, helping clean the hall and organizing community events. In return, I received a small financial help, and even more importantly, a purpose. I felt part of something greater. I was helping other people who, like me, were looking for a fresh start. And on nights I spent there, Looking at the American sky through the simple church window, I offered a silent prayer, thanking for that place and those people. Maybe, in some way, it was an answer to my prayers. Maybe my journey to the United States wasn't just a material pursuit, but a journey to find my faith, a new path. Time passed, and my routine divided between construction work, where I made some money, and the church tasks, which gave me strength to continue. Gradually, I became a familiar presence in church activities. The pastor observed me, maybe seeing in me a potential I didn't yet see myself. She began to ask me to help with other activities, such as organizing services and guiding other immigrants who, like me, sought support and hope. More and more, I felt that place had become my new home. Despite all the difficulties, I felt I was there for a purpose. But at the same time, I knew that my situation as an illegal immigrant always kept me on the margins. It was a reality I tried to ignore, but that haunted me day and night. I was constantly worried about being discovered, about everything ending suddenly. One day, the pastor called me for a private conversation. She looked directly into my eyes and asked about the future. Have you ever thought about what you really want here in the United States? She asked, her voice calm but firm. That question caught me by surprise. I had never really stopped to think about it so clearly. When I left Brazil, all I wanted was a better life, a chance to be more than someone fighting to survive. But as the days passed, I realized my path was turning into something much deeper. I was indeed reconnecting with my faith and perhaps with a new life mission. I talked with the pastor about my fears and dreams, and she said something I will never forget. You know, the greatest miracle that can happen in a person's life is not to have everything they want, but to find themselves. Have you found your path? Her question stayed in my mind for days, and I began to realize that my desire to succeed in the United States wasn't just about making money, but about transforming my life and becoming a better person. I began to feel a strong calling to help others. Working at the church became a big part of my time, and I felt happy about it. More and more, I was surrounded by people who, like me, sought a second chance. Some nights, I stayed late helping families find a place to stay, distributing food to those in need, and in each smile of gratitude I received, I found the strength to keep going. I realized that, just like me, these people faced fear, loneliness, and the uncertainty of living in a foreign country. But not everything was easy. One of the biggest struggles I faced was within myself. There were moments when I felt consumed by doubt and fear. As an illegal immigrant, any wrong move could cost me everything. I lived in constant fear of being discovered, that a report or even a simple mistake could take me back to Brazil, away from the new life I was building. I felt a growing anguish, a weight in my chest that seemed to constantly remind me that I was always just one step away from losing everything. This tension between the life I was building and the constant insecurity began to consume me. Some nights, I could hardly sleep, haunted by nightmares where I watched everything collapse. But even in those moments of weakness, I found solace in faith and in the pastor's words. She reminded me that, regardless of the circumstances, the strength I was looking for was within me and that I should keep going without fear of facing obstacles. Then a great challenge presented itself. The church decided to organize a larger community event, which would bring more visibility to the work we were doing with immigrants. The idea was to support entire families, offering food, clothing, and even legal help to those who needed it. This event would be an opportunity to show the neighborhood the importance of our community and to open the doors to more people in need. The pastor asked me to lead the organization of this event. I felt honored but also terrified. With this exposure, I would become more visible, which also increased the risk of being discovered. For a few days, I thought about declining. The fear seemed stronger than the desire to take on that responsibility. However, remembering the pastor's words about finding my path, I realized that perhaps this was part of my purpose. I was not there just for myself, but also for the people facing the same battles. So I decided to accept, trusting that my faith and mission would guide me. The event was a success. Families came from various places, thankful for the help and support. I felt a deep emotion seeing people being welcomed, seeing the light in their eyes. It was as if, for the first time, I was truly contributing to something greater, something that made a difference in the lives of people who, like me, carried the weight of homesickness and the pain of uncertainty. That night, I returned to my small room exhausted, but with a sense of fulfillment I had never felt before. For the first time, I felt I was on the right path. I knew that difficulties would still come, that fear and insecurity would continue to accompany me, but now I had something stronger within me, a renewed faith and a clear purpose. It was there, in that moment of peace, that I understood that, regardless of where I was or what I faced, I had finally found a spiritual home. What connected me to that community was not just the need to survive, but the desire to transform lives, including my own. And as long as I had the strength to continue, I would keep fighting to be a light for others, even in the darkness. The days after the community event were intense. People who had come to the church began to return in search of spiritual support and guidance. I was no longer just someone helping with activities. Many started to see me as someone they could trust, a friend, a reference. Without even realizing it, I had become a pillar for others who, like me, sought redemption and a new beginning. For the first time, I felt that I was truly fulfilling a mission. But along with this responsibility came new challenges. The weight of others' expectations began to pressure me. I constantly asked myself if I was really capable of helping these people, or if I was deceiving myself by thinking I had something to offer. I started to question my own faith and wondered if I was really being honest with the people who came to me. One of those nights of doubt, I decided to talk to the pastor. I told her about my uncertainties, about the fear of not living up to what people expected of me. She listened attentively and with a compassionate smile replied, "Faith, my dear, is not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to face doubts and move forward even when we don't understand everything. It's accepting that we won't always be ready, but that God works through us, even in our imperfection." Her words calmed me, but deep down, something still bothered me. The feeling that I was always living a double life, as if I were trapped between two worlds, the man I wanted to be and the illegal immigrant who had to hide. I began to wonder if I would ever really be free of that weight. A few weeks later, one of the men who attended the church came to me privately. He was in a situation similar to mine, but he was facing even more difficulties. His temporary visa had expired, and he was without work, money, and with a family to support. He asked me for help, and in that moment, I felt I needed to do something, but at the same time, I knew I was taking risks. I decided to help, even with the fear of being exposed. I took him to a construction site where I had some contacts and managed to get him a few days of work. However, days later, we discovered that immigration was investigating that site. A colleague warned us in time, and he managed to step away, but the scare made me realize just how fragile our lives were there. A small slip, a hasty decision, and we could lose everything. This episode made me reflect more deeply on what I was doing. With time, the responsibility in the church and the risks I was taking began to weigh even more. I started to wonder if that life of hiding and uncertainty was really the right path. The doubt consumed me, leaving me restless and tormented. My faith was becoming something I constantly needed to renew because each challenge, each new risk, seemed to wear it down. It was an intense internal battle. One early morning, unable to sleep, I went for a walk around the city. The streets were quiet, and the cold breeze made me feel small in that vast and unknown place. I sat on a park bench and looked at the starry sky, asking God if He was really with me, if this was the path He had planned for me. I felt tears roll down, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the weight of loneliness. That night, I remembered my mother's words, who used to tell me when I was a child that God never abandons us, even in the most difficult moments. That memory felt like a hug, something that gave me the strength to keep going, even without all the answers. There, I decided that, regardless of the difficulties, I would keep moving forward because I felt that there was something beyond my understanding guiding me. The next Sunday, during the service, while helping to organize chairs and greet the congregation, I felt a deep peace. It was as if, despite the difficulties, my faith was strengthening. With each step I took, even amidst uncertainties, I felt I was getting closer to something real, something that couldn't be explained, but only felt. From that day forward, I decided that my path would be guided by faith and by the trust that as long as I was there to help, my mission would continue. I realized that, though fear and doubt were part of me, they didn't have to define who I was. I was more than an immigrant, more than someone fleeing. I was someone who, despite all the challenges, was willing to fight for a life with purpose. The days at church and work continued to be intense, but my connection to that place and to the community grew deeper. The responsibility I felt toward those people also increased. The church had become a refuge for immigrants and for anyone who needed a friendly shoulder or a word of hope. I found myself increasingly involved, learning stories similar to mine, from people who had left everything behind in search of a chance to start again. It was during this period that I met Anna, a Brazilian who had started attending the church. She was different from the other people who came to us. She seemed to carry both sadness and strength intensely within her. She told me she had come to the United States with her husband, but he had abandoned her months later. Without support and without steady work, she was on the brink of despair, trying to survive while attempting to understand why everything had gone so wrong. We began talking after services, and gradually, we created a bond that went beyond friendship. The nights we spent helping at the church, talking about our pasts, our dreams, and our fears awakened something in me that I tried to ignore. The attraction I felt for Anna was mixed with respect and the desire to help her overcome her suffering. One day, while we were talking after a service, Anna confided in me about her doubts regarding faith. Sometimes I wonder if God really hears us, if all of this is worth it, she confessed, her voice choked. I looked at her, and the pain in her eyes reminded me of the nights of doubt and loneliness I had endured. I knew exactly how she felt, and I tried to share with her the little hope I managed to hold on to for myself. Anna, I feel the same way. I believe that faith is not about certainty, but a decision to move forward, even when it seems like we're not being heard. Maybe God doesn't give us what we ask for in the way we expect, but I believe He is with us, and somehow all this strengthens us. That night, as we said goodbye, she held my hand for a moment longer. It was a simple gesture, but one full of meaning. I knew that, from then on, she would be important to me, and this made me question my choices. As an illegal immigrant, without a stable foundation, and always under the shadow of fear, I wondered if it was fair to open my heart to someone. However, the connection we had was something I couldn't ignore, and I decided that, regardless of the difficulties, I would stay by her side. As our friendship grew, I began to see Anna blossom. She found an inner strength that seemed lost and became more involved in church activities. Many times, we worked side by side helping other immigrants, and together, we discovered the power of solidarity, of unity. And just as I helped her, she also became a support for me, someone I trusted to share my fears and uncertainties. Then something unexpected happened. During an overnight vigil at the church, a group of immigration agents showed up in the neighborhood. They were conducting an operation looking for illegal immigrants, and everyone panicked. Some of the church members grew tense, fearing they would be discovered. The pastor tried to calm everyone, instructing us to stay calm and trust that we were safe inside the church. However, The fear was almost palpable in the air. I looked around and saw familiar faces, men and women who, like me, had left everything behind to try a new life. I saw Anna's face, tense but determined. In that moment, I realized that the faith that united us was also an invisible force, something that gave us the courage to face the situation. When the agents finally passed by the street, I felt a deep relief, as if a great wave of tension was dissipating. But at the same time, I understood that our life there would remain a constant battle. That experience brought us even closer together, and the feeling that I had something to protect, something to fight for, only grew. That same night, after everyone left, I stayed at the church with Anna. She hugged me in silence, and in that gesture, there was a comfort that words couldn't express. I felt that we were there, together, not just as people trying to survive, but as souls who had found a sense of belonging and love amidst the chaos. From that night on, our relationship deepened, and the church became more than a spiritual shelter. It was the home we built together, the foundation of a life that, despite all the uncertainties, was filled with faith and purpose. Living with Anna brought a new dimension to my life. She had become more than a friend. She was my anchor, someone with whom I shared the victories and pains of each day. Each moment we spent together, whether helping at the church or talking about our dreams and fears, strengthened a connection that seemed inexplicable to me. I never imagined I would find someone like that so far from home, in a life full of uncertainties and challenges. Over time, our relationship began to transform. We started meeting outside the church, in parks and small cafes where no one knew us. These moments were ours, away from the eyes and pressures of the world. We walked together on quiet streets, talking about the past and imagining a future that, despite the difficulties, now seemed possible. But just as our bond grew stronger, so did the dilemmas. I knew that as illegal immigrants, we lived a limited life. The fear of being caught was constant, and no matter how much we tried to live with the hope of a better future, we knew that any wrong move could separate us. This fear sometimes weighed more than the joy of being together. We didn't want to make plans because reality always reminded us of the fragility of our situation. Additionally, as our relationship deepened, so did the questions regarding my mission at the church. The pastor, who had always supported me, called me for a conversation one night, sensing the change in me. She was perceptive and knew that by opening my heart to Anna, I had also opened a new door of insecurities and fears. "I see that you are torn," she said, her gaze piercing yet kind. "This mission you have here is an important calling, but I understand that love brings other dreams and hopes with it. Have you thought about what you truly want for your future here in the United States?" Her words echoed within me for days. I knew my mission there, helping the community and welcoming those in need, was a powerful calling. However, my heart was divided. Beside Anna, I felt a peace I had never experienced before, a feeling of home that even the church couldn't provide. One night, while confiding in Anna, I spoke about my doubts. She listened attentively, and her eyes reflected the same uncertainty I felt. "I don't know what to do either," she admitted, holding my hand. "But I know that being by your side gives me the strength to face anything. Maybe we don't need all the answers now. Maybe it's enough to just be together, facing whatever comes." Those words brought me comfort, but they also added to my responsibility. I didn't want to be just a temporary presence in her life. I didn't want our relationship to be marked by insecurity. I wanted to offer her a stable future, something more concrete than the fear and uncertainty surrounding us. However, the reality was harsh, and immigration was becoming increasingly strict. The situation for illegal immigrants in the country was worsening, and rumors that immigration operations were increasing were common. With the growing pressure and fear, I began to question whether staying at the church was the right path. I felt that by exposing myself so much, I was also putting Anna at risk. However, abandoning everything I had built was something I couldn't bear. The church, and especially the people we helped there, were a part of who I had become. They gave me a purpose, and leaving them would feel like denying my mission. Then I decided to have one last conversation with the pastor. With a lump in my throat, I talked about my doubts, about the fear of exposing Anna and losing everything we had built. She listened to me in silence, and at the end, placed her hand on my shoulder, saying something I would never forget. "Loving someone is an act of faith, just like the life you chose to live here. I believe that when we choose a path, it becomes part of us. Don't run from what your heart is asking for, but remember, your faith is your strength." No matter where you are or what you face, God is with you. And if this love is true, it will also be your strength to move forward, even through the greatest challenges. Those words brought me a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that life is made of difficult choices and that there is no perfect path. So I decided I would continue my mission at the church and by Anna's side, without hiding and without running from what my heart was asking for. I knew the difficulties would continue, but now I had clarity that my faith and my love for her were the two forces that would guide me, even in the darkest days. That night, I looked for Anna, and under the starry sky, I shared my decision with her. She smiled, and together, we made a silent promise to face the future side by side. We knew the road would be hard, but at that moment, we were certain that, together, we would be stronger. In the months that followed our promise, Anna and I faced each day with a quiet courage. We knew that, amid any tranquility, there was the risk that everything could change in an instant. The situation for immigrants in the country had worsened. Immigration operations were more frequent, especially in areas where they knew legal immigrants worked. However, in each day of fear and uncertainty, my faith seemed stronger, as if it were an invisible foundation, sustaining me even in the darkest moments. The church continued to be a support point for the community and for us. However, with the growing tension, our own church began to be seen as a risk. One day, the pastor called Anna and me for a serious conversation. She had received information that immigration was monitoring community support activities at the church and that there might be an operation soon. The pastor was willing to do everything to protect the community, but she also knew that if anything happened, many of us, including Anna and me, would risk being deported. The news hit me like a blow to the chest. All our efforts, every moment of dedication, was under threat. I looked at Anna, and I saw the same fear in her eyes. This situation forced us to face the harsh reality. Maybe our time there was ending. That night, when we returned to the small apartment we shared, we discussed what to do. Anna suggested that maybe the best thing would be to leave, to look for a place where surveillance wasn't so intense. She didn't want us to risk everything we had built. However, inside me, something resisted the idea of leaving the church and the people who relied on me. If we leave now, who will help those who, like us, only have this place for support? I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. Anna looked at me silently for a moment. I knew she understood. Deep down, she wanted to stay too. But the fear of losing everything was still greater. We knew we couldn't hide forever, but we also didn't want to lose what we had built together. It was a difficult night, with few words and many thoughts. We knew that, regardless of our choice, the road would be uncertain and full of challenges. The next morning, the decision seemed clearer. Together, we agreed to face the situation, even with the risks. We would continue helping the community, but we would take all possible precautions to protect ourselves and the church. We organized a plan with the pastor and other church members. We would avoid activities that drew too much attention, be discreet, and stay alert for any signs of danger. For a while, this strategy seemed to work. But on a rainy afternoon, what we feared happened. We were distributing food in a small park near the church when we saw immigration vehicles. The fear paralyzed us for a second, and before we could react, agents were already approaching. A group of immigrants in the park tried to flee, but the agents were quick. The scene was chaotic, shouting, people running, and in the background, the sound of sirens that amplified everyone's fear. I tried to hold Anna's hand and pull her away, but the crowd was intense. We got separated for a moment, and panic took hold of me. I looked around, trying to find her, my heart racing. In that moment, nothing mattered more than finding her. I ran in her direction when I saw her, and together we tried to get out of the chaos. However, amidst the commotion, an agent spotted us. When he approached, I felt the weight of despair take over me. In a matter of seconds, our whole life, our dreams, everything seemed on the verge of being destroyed. I knew that if we were caught, it would mean the end of what we had built in the United States. I looked at Anna, and I saw in her eyes the same struggle between fear and determination. Feeling the weight of the situation, I made a final silent prayer. I asked God to give us strength and somehow help us get out of that situation. Then, in an impulse, we ran to a side street and managed to hide behind a car. We could hear the agent's footsteps and voices approaching, and I felt my heart almost pounding out of my chest. Every second felt like an eternity. I held on his hand tightly, trying to convey a hope I could barely feel myself. We stayed there, silent, breathing deeply and praying that they wouldn't find us. After what felt like an endless wait, we heard the sounds receding. The immediate danger had passed, but we knew that from that day on, our lives would never be the same. The city that had once represented hope now felt hostile to us, and the threat was closer than ever. That night, we sought refuge in the church and spoke with the pastor about what had happened. With a worried look, she told us that maybe it was time to reconsider our stay there. It was painful to admit, but we knew that, to keep ourselves safe and keep the mission we had built alive, we might need to leave. Our purpose, along with the community and our faith, would always be a part of us. And although our lives were uncertain, we held on to the hope that wherever we were, God would guide us. It was with this hope that, the next morning, we began to prepare for a new journey. Anna and I were together, side by side, carrying the weight of uncertainty, but also the faith that would guide us wherever we needed to go. And so, with hearts full of gratitude for everything we had experienced, we moved forward, ready to start again. The days that followed were filled with silent tension. Every time we left the house, we looked around, alert to any suspicious movement. We lived as shadows, always a step behind, always afraid. In that city that had once represented hope, we now felt the weight of constant danger. Amid this internal chaos, my faith continued to sustain me, but I knew something inside me was changing. The pastor helped us make some plans so that, if necessary, we could move to another city with more security. But despite the preparations, we knew that this choice wouldn't be easy. What we had built there, the people, the stories, the bonds we had formed, leaving all of it behind, seemed too high a price to pay. One night, as we prepared for a silent vigil, I received news that would change everything. The pastor gathered us and informed us that immigration was planning a new operation in churches and community organizations supporting immigrants. This time, the operation was large and organized, and our church was one of the targets. The information was still vague, but enough for us to know that time was running out. In the midst of that fear, Anna approached me and, holding my hands, spoke softly. "I don't want our life to be just about running. If we're truly going to build a future together, I want it to be with hope, not fear." Her words touched me deeply. I knew she was right, and that maybe we needed a change for that hope to flourish. So we decided it was time to leave. It was a difficult choice, but we knew we had no other option. On our last night at the church, the pastor organized a small service for us. We were surrounded by people we knew well, people who had become our family. During the service, each person present offered us a prayer and words of support. I felt that, in a way, that moment was a closure, a farewell, but also a new beginning. At the end of the service, the pastor approached and handed me her personal Bible, with a message written on the first pages. Never forget that your faith is your greatest strength. It is what guides your journey, no matter where you are. That phrase became engraved in my soul. I understood then that my spiritual mission, the calling I had felt since deciding to cross the border, did not depend on a physical place. It was something I would carry with me wherever I went. The next morning, Anna and I packed our few belongings and said goodbye to the city that we had once called home. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, we felt ready to face it. We were together, with our faith renewed and the hope that wherever we were, we could start over. Our final destination was still unknown, but we knew that as long as we were by each other's side, we would find a way. With the pastor's Bible in my hands, I felt that, regardless of the challenges that would come, God was with us, guiding every step of our journey. The days following our departure were ones of adaptation and silence. In each city we passed through, I felt a mix of nostalgia and relief. I had left a part of myself in that small church, in the people who had welcomed me, and in the life we had built there. But at the same time, I knew this was a new beginning. Anna and I were together, more united than ever, and our spirits were strengthened by faith and by the certainty that this love would sustain us. We found a small town in the countryside, where the presence of immigrants went less noticed. We rented a small apartment, and with time, managed to find temporary jobs that allowed us to live with dignity. Our routine was simple, but we felt a peace we hadn't felt in a long time. Each morning, waking up and seeing Anna's face beside me, I felt a deep gratitude. In each simple gesture, in each meal shared, we found a purpose, a meaning. My faith, which had been challenged so many times, grew stronger every day. And although we were no longer in the church that had become our spiritual home, Anna and I developed the habit of holding small prayer meetings at home. We invited neighbors, other immigrants who, like us, were seeking a safe haven. In these moments, we felt the same peace, the same sense of belonging that we had found in the services. The church we had lost was now in our hearts, and in each person we welcomed into our modest living room. The pastor's Bible, with her personal message, became my guide. Every time I opened those pages, I found words that spoke directly to my soul, that reminded me that my journey was still ongoing. God doesn't abandon us, even when the paths are difficult. And beside Anna, I learned that love and faith are the two forces that transform lives. Over time, our small community grew. People started coming to us for advice, support, and faith. There, in that modest room, we recreated what we once had in the previous city, a refuge, a spiritual home where no one was judged, where everyone could be heard and welcomed. The mission I had started in that church, alongside the pastor, was still alive, even in the midst of a new life and new challenges. At one of our gatherings, a young immigrant mother, with tears in her eyes, thanked me for being a support for her. In that moment, I realized that my journey as an immigrant, with all its hardships and trials, had given me what I had always searched for, a reason to keep going, something beyond mere survival. My purpose was not in a specific place, but in the people we helped, in the faith we shared, in the hope we brought to each person who crossed our path. As the young woman thanked me, Anna held my hand and smiled at me. And there, in that moment, I understood that God had indeed guided me from Brazil, across the border, through every experience, challenge, and fresh start. Our story was made of many chapters, of struggles and faith, and now, together, we were writing a new chapter. The hope I had once sought was now with me, no longer as a distant dream, but as a reality. Every step taken, every prayer said, every person welcomed was now part of our purpose. Looking around, I felt an immense peace, a certainty that the path was only beginning. And with the faith we carried and the love that united us, we knew we could face any challenge that came.